In this video, we're going to talk about the concepts of economic efficiency and deadweight loss. And specifically, we're going to look at the efficiency costs associated with price ceilings and price floors. In a prior video discussing consumer and producer surplus, we noted that in a competitive market, both consumers and producers gain from trade. The net gains that consumers receive is a consumer surplus, which is the golden area in this diagram, and producers receive a net gain equal to producer surplus, which is the light blue area in this diagram. Economists will often talk about the allocative efficiency associated with market equilibria, because one of the things we can observe is that society's surplus is maximized at Q star, at the competitive equilibrium. It would never be optimal to produce more than Q star, because beyond that point, the additional cost to producers would outweigh the benefits to consumers. And if output is anywhere below Q star, there are some potential gains that are just simply not being realized. Let's take a look at that. Suppose there's some barrier to production which reduces output from Q star to Q prime. That area between Q prime and Q star is no longer produced, and as a result, we have what we call a deadweight loss. And deadweight loss is a loss of consumer and producer surplus that occurs when we are not at a point of allocative efficiency. In this diagram, it's represented by the light brown shaded area. The top portion of that represents a loss in consumer surplus, because consumers get no benefit from output they can't consume. And the bottom part is a loss in producer surplus, which is a loss that firms receive by not being able to sell those extra units at a price that's more than it would have cost them to produce that output. Now, let's talk about price ceilings and price floors. One of the things you've learned is that a price ceiling to be effective has to be below the equilibrium price, because the purpose of a price ceiling is to keep prices lower. The reason for the price ceiling is to try to benefit consumers. And if we look at this diagram, we see that in response to the price ceiling, output falls from Q star to Q double prime, while the price ends up falling from P star to P double prime. The benefit that consumers receive is that they now pay a lower price for the good. And we can measure the dollar value of the benefits they receive on the output they're able to consume by area A in this diagram. But we can also note that area A used to be part of producer surplus. So what happens is that because the price of this good is now lower, consumers pay less and producers receive less. For every dollar in area A that consumers gain, producers have lost a dollar. But up until Q double prime, consumers have gained and producers have lost. But because the output between Q double prime and Q star is no longer produced, we have that deadweight loss. No one receives benefits from output that doesn't get produced. Area B is a loss in consumer surplus. Area C is the loss in producer surplus. If we look at this in terms of the benefits to consumers, though, consumers gain area A and lose area B. Area A will always be larger than area B. So consumers unambiguously gain from having a price ceiling. But areas B plus C represent the deadweight loss, which is a net loss for society. So from society's standpoint, society is worse off and there's a loss of allocative efficiency. In particular, if we were to measure the dollar value of the deadweight loss, that would be a measure of the loss in net benefits that societies receive whenever a price ceiling is in effect. And note that any price ceiling will always have this adverse impact. It will always make society as a whole worse off, because even though consumers gain, for every dollar they gain, producers lose a dollar. There's also this deadweight loss, a loss in net benefits that's no longer available to either consumers or producers. A price floor is designed to keep prices high and to benefit producers at the expense of consumers. So when a price floor is introduced, it has to be above the equilibrium. In this diagram, a price floor is introduced at a price of P prime. And when this price floor is introduced, we see that quantity falls. Remember, both price ceilings and price floors will result in a reduction in the quantity sold, because the quantity that's sold is always going to be the minimum of the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. What we observe here is that because producers receive a higher price, they gain an amount equal to area A. That used to be consumer surplus, and now it becomes producer surplus. But for every dollar that producers gain in area A, consumers lost a dollar. So that's not a net effect on society as a whole. It's just a redistribution of income from consumers to producers. But if we look at area B, that used to be also consumer surplus, and we observe that the loss in consumer surplus is larger than the gain that producers receive. And furthermore, area C represents a loss that producers receive in surplus. So what happens again is that whenever we introduce a price ceiling or a price floor in a competitive market, we're always going to observe some deadweight loss. And that deadweight loss represents an efficiency cost for society. Producers, though, will generally lobby for price floors because they end up with a net gain. But from society's perspective, society is worse off. So in general, while price floors or price ceilings may seem intuitively appealing, there is a cost to society of introducing either of them.